latest How Did I Get Here? Today, our guest is Stephen Chilton, also known as Psycho Steve. He's a music promoter based in Phoenix, Arizona. He runs Psycho Steve Presents. He owns the Rebel Lounge, and he's currently the vice president of NEVA, the National Independent Venue Association, a group of an organization that came together kind of at the beginning of COVID to help venues, promoters, and independent festivals figure out how to handle COVID, uh, and will likely continue off in the future, making sure venues can work together and whatnot. It's a good chat. I'm excited to have him. I also want to give you a heads up. These will be slowing down. This is kind of sort of our season finale, maybe. I might have one more episode in a week. I'm not really sure yet. But yeah, until then, okay, I'll just let you know. I have a little bit of part time work, which is exciting. I'm not going to talk about it on the podcast, but yeah, I'll be a little bit busy. It's a project that's supposed to go for a few months. So you'll hear from me a little bit less over the next few months. Also means you probably don't get an exciting post-election episode or a depressing post-election episode. I have no idea how this is going to go. So vote, please, please, please vote. Even though we're coming to not an end, but a slowdown, please subscribe. Actually, it's more important that you subscribe now because if these aren't coming every Wednesday morning, you're never going to know when I have something to say to you. Yeah, tell your friends, vote us up. Not vote us up. Give us good reviews. Yeah, wherever you listen to podcasts, express your adoration for what I do in whatever way the podcast lets you. And now, time to crack open a mango White Claw and enjoy the show. Hello, welcome to How Did I Get Here? My guest tonight is Psycho Steve or Stephen Chilton. Should I call you Psycho Steve or should I call you Stephen Chilton?
Same thing.
Can I just call you Mr. Psycho?
Sure.
All right, Mr. Psycho's here. He is the owner of Psycho Steve Presents. He's also the vice president of NEVA, the National Independent Venue Association, and he owns a bar called Rebel Lounge and does 8 million other things. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Psycho.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I start every podcast with the same question. Everybody hates it. I keep doing it. Uh, so, what was the musical moment in your life that made you go, huh, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to spend my working existence.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer yeah, I can see. I don't know like a musical moment, like a moment. I didn't really go to concerts as a like young, like my family didn't go, went to a couple things but not a lot. Family was definitely not big concert goer. When I was a kid, it wasn't like I had a my older siblings were a lot older. I didn't have someone driving me, and went to a couple big things. And then like the first sort of punk rock shows I went to when I was like 15 or 16, and then just suddenly dove in and was just like, oh, like this is a thing. Like I can go to punk rock shows for $10. Like this isn't an arena or a big thing. It's like, oh, I can just go down to the Nile and see, you know, 7 Seconds or Phoenix TX or the Ataris or all that stuff in the late 90s and go see, and then eventually Jimmy Eat World. And it was just like eye opening at like 16 going, oh my God, there's this like whole underground community and punk rock that I didn't like. Punk rock was the Sex Pistols to me, as like a 15-year-old mainstream sort of music fan, and just dove really in it. And then, it wasn't until like a year later, I was only 17 when I started booking shows. I was booking my friends' bands because I just went to so many shows and knew people. And like like a lot of people, I think their social network expands when after they graduate high school. It's like you graduate high school and you go to college, and your friends are your high school friends or your church friends, and then you go to college and they're college friends. Well, my friends in high school started being all my show friends, and it's like I went to a lot of shows by myself, met, and when you go to shows by yourself at 16 and 17, because like all my friends couldn't go to a show on a Tuesday night, and they had to save their money to go see a big arena show or whatever. And I was like, I don't want to go see an arena show. I want to see 20 punk rock shows, not one arena show. And so just started making lots of friends. And so like all my friends in bands didn't know anyone at venues. They didn't know any of the other bands. They didn't know the local bands, but they played in bands, and I didn't play in bands, but I knew who to talk to at this little tiny punk rock bar, like like the underground scene. And I knew other bands, and they're like, oh, you know that band? And I was like, yeah, I know those guys. Like, because we're talking about like local bands. It's like, yeah, they play in front of 100 people on a Friday. Like I know those guys. And just like the first show I was ever involved in, I booked. Like I had never interned anywhere. I had never worked for anyone. I had never had a job. Like I had been like harassing this little venue, Modified Arts, that was this little cool DIY 100-person art space, very much like the Smell in LA or something, that had just opened. And like I kind of knew the guy there because I would talk to him when I went to shows, and was like kept hounding him to like put some of my friends' bands on shows. And then he finally was like, dude, I'm not putting any of these bands on these shows you're asking about, but I'll give you a Friday night. Like if you want to book your own show on a Friday, I'm like, I could do that, And so then it was like, oh, you can get us a show at Modified. And it was like, and all my high school friends were like, oh, you can get us on a real show. Because they were all playing like house parties and stuff. And then so, I don't know if there was like a moment in there, but then it just, for the rest of high school, I did like a show every month or so, every 6 weeks. And then in college, it just gradually started building. Like in college, it was a couple shows a month, and then it was 4 shows a month. And then, eventually last year was 600 shows, in a year. So it just, I don't know if there was like I can't think of a moment in there that was like the change in that. Cause it was never intent. Like I was just a high school kid booking some punk rock shows. There was never intention like that was going to be my job. It wasn't like, oh, this could be a career.
Yeah, I love that you were just trying to get a friend of yours like some friends of yours onto bills at a space, and you pester the person so much that they just gave you a whole night.
Yeah, and in retrospect, I was asking for my friends who are in like crappy high school bands to get on with like the coolest indie buzz shows, and the guy's like, I'm not putting them on these like these really cool touring bands, And it was like, and now it makes it like now I get it. It was like, yeah, fucking, and I'll give it. You want to fill my Friday? Sure, And it was like, a little DIY art space where they didn't care about bars. There's no bar sales. It was like, yeah, you put 100 kids in this art space and give us whatever. I remember the first night he like, at the end of the night gave me all the money and was like, how, what are you doing? And it was like, you need to go pay, or like, you need to pay the bands. I was like, I need to pay the bands. Like, how does that work? And like, he grabbed a flyer and showed me a settle, it was like, okay, well, like, let's walk you through this. And like, we did the most it was like you sold 100 tickets at $5 and made, and like, I'm charging you $150. And what did you spend on flyers? You spent $20 on some posters, flyers. And like, you bought some, I'm going to charge you $5 for the bottle. We did a settlement, and it was like, there's 4 bands and we divide, and it was like, walk me through the first settlement ever on the back of a fucking flyer, and like, really, that's not anything different. Like that settlement isn't anything different than a festival. It's just a lot more lines.
That's
Um,
it's amazing that a guy who runs a DIY space just gave you a crash course in how to run a business in one night.
well, I mean, definitely lots of mistakes learned after that, and like, but that was like the simplest form. Like there was no guarantee, there was no deal with the bands. I just booked my friends' bands in high school, and we called it $5 because that's what a punk rock show in 2000. It was like, let's charge $5, and like, I didn't make a deal with any of the bands, and they were all stoked that they all got made up. I don't know, $100 or whatever it was, and it was like, we got $100, like, and that was all it was. And it was quite a while before I ever did like I was just doing DIY shows that were fun. Like it wasn't, at first and then it was like, oh, my friends have this band that's on tour, and you have that, you know, uh, first touring band I ever booked was Limbeck from Orange County, and it was like one of their first like tours. And I had been given, they gave me the Friday night to book my friend's bands, a friend's band, and someone called and was like, Limbeck wanted that date and modified, and they're like, oh well, Steve has the date. You need to talk to him. And they're like, okay, we'll call this guy Steve, and they're like, we got this band Limbeck. They're from Orange County. Like they just did blah 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 blah. And I was like, I know who that band is. Like, like they'll play. Like, what do they want? They're like, $400. And I was like, of course. Like, oh my god, like that's a real band. They were a real band, and they turned into some of like my best friend. For years they were like some of my best friends because I just brought them out every time we could, and like for years, like they helped. They were like, when they got a real agent, they're like, no, Steve's our guy in Phoenix. And it was just grew from that. And it was like, my friends have a band, and this band said, and 20 years later, it's still really the same thing. It's just much bigger.
Yeah. At what point did you realize that this was something that you could actually like do to support yourself?
Uh, well, so after so in college, I went into LA and interned for Vagrant for a summer, like during college, like summer internship. And then after college, I did a little bit of touring with a band, some from friends from here, a band called De Soleil. Um, that had like just signed to a small label. Little buzzy band. We're in a van and doing the one step above a DIY tour, touring a van. And then sort of that tour ended, or did a couple months with them, and it was like, okay, that's not. They were great dudes, but they couldn't pay me for the next tour, and so then I moved to LA and tried to get jobs in LA for a year, and was just doing some freelance design stuff, like managing a cool small band from Phoenix that was unsigned, like just doing, sort of some small hustle, but like all my work was in Phoenix, all my freelance design stuff was in Phoenix. All the bands I was working with were in Phoenix. Like, and just, I moved to LA that year that like all the record labels laid everybody off. Like I moved to LA in January, and like that month Capitol fired like half their office, and then like a week later, like Warner Brothers fired everybody. And then like it's just like a bad time to be in LA, and like I wasn't doing anything productive. And so after a year, I was like, I came back came back to Phoenix for Christmas, wasn't really, I was just intending to come back for Christmas spend a couple weeks around the holidays, and then kind of just didn't go back. And so people were like, well, can you get us a show? And I was like, okay, I'll book a show. And then it was like, why am I in LA struggling to try and find, I was doing random odd shit, trying to find a job in the industry, and sort of came back to Phoenix and was doing shows. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do like, was making enough off some small shows where it was like, I'm just going to do this and just like, I'm just going to keep booking shows because that's working. Um, and just sort of said, okay, I'm just going to do this full time, and was working for some other promoters and doing a lot of hustling, like doing some band merch, doing some, working for, being a runner or promoter rep for other promoters, like just, and promoting my own shows. And so it was like, okay, I'm just like going to keep doing that stuff. And, was getting enough bigger, starting to get some noteworthy shows by this point. Um, and had enough time to really put into them. And so was just hustling on my shows.
Yeah. So one thing about your career that's always kind of blew my mind was that you you were a promoter and you were also kind of working for your competitors at the same time. How does that work?
So I was director of marketing for Stateside Presents for a while, and when they opened the Crescent Ballroom, I was doing all the local, but sort of like doing all the local booking and filling the calendar for Crescent as an employee of Crescent. But at the same time, I was booking my own shows, so I was booking both Crescent as Crescent's in-house buyer, and I was buying my own shows as Psycho Steve Presents. And it kind of happened because I couldn't even tell you when I got hot, like at what point I started working there, because it was that sort of when I moved back to Phoenix, it was like Charlie was like, hey, can you make me a flyer for the show? My guy can't. And then it was like, okay, here's a flyer. And then he's like, hey, can you do door for me on Friday? And I was like, okay, cool, I can do door for you. And then at some point, it was like it turned in, Charlie at that point was doing 100 something shows a year. I don't remember what Stateside was doing, but he was doing all the cool. He was doing Modest Mouse and Jimmy Eat World and like real. I mean, he was doing real shit, but he was like the cool indie guy that didn't have a room. And it turned from a gig here and a gig there into becoming one of his go-to. He had one employee at that point, and it was like I was their go-to guy, and then I was doing all their flyering, which was great because he paid me to go flyer, and then I would take my stuff. And so it just gradually turned into, wait, you're calling me 25 times a day. It's like I spend all day at a desk emailing on your back and forth with you on your, and it just evolved into, wait, this is actually a job. And then Crescent opened and it was like, well, what's my role going to be in there? And he's like, I don't know. Like, do you want to, can you help book all the local shows? And then, so I was just like, when they opened, like helping book the local shows. And he's like, no, this is your job now. Like you're the guy that books all the local shows. And I was like, great. And so it just evolved. And then, but the whole time I was doing my shows and his shows, and we'd do some shows as we'd partner on some shows, and the split had nothing to do with any bad blood or any sort of disputes. It was just I was working. That job became full time. Stateside was running Crescent Ballroom at the time. We were doing a couple hundred shows on top of that. He was doing shows like Black Keys and Arcade Fire and arenas. And, like he needed a full-time, director of marketing and a full-time local buyer. And I was doing full-time on Psycho Steve. And so at one point I quit working for Stateside so he could hire a full-time marketing director. And I spent another year or so booking Crescent. And the whole time my shows were expanding. And the conflict wasn't between our businesses. The conflict was my time. And it was like, I can't work full time for you and full time for me. And like, it was sort of both were suffering. And like, I went from doing 50 shows a year to 100 and something shows a year. And I was like, I can't do 100 shows a year and work a day job full time. I was working more than full time for him and full time for me. And it's just, I remember there was one week, I think I settled 14 shows in a week.
Wow.
Because I was just going back and forth from my shows. I settled a couple for him and a couple of I was settling 2 or 3 shows a night and was just like, I can't keep settling 2 or 3 shows a night. And I'm leaving my show to go settle one of his shows. And I'm not doing either show a service because I'm doing a half-assed job on both, and it was something had to give. And it was like, do I fold my stuff into his stuff, or do I just go out on my, just focus on my stuff? And like, and so when I quit, he called me like 2 hours later and was like, so are you still going to work at the office, or like, what's your plan? And I went, I don't know. Like, I hadn't thought about it. Like, I really hadn't thought about it. I just know I can't deal with the pressure. And he's like, well, if you want to keep your desk, like, just keep coming in and helping, because I was so ingrained in, like, so many of my shows were in, at that time, so many of my shows were in his venue. And so it was like, and he knew he wanted my, he was hiring someone to replace me, and was like, well, my friend Alex, he hired my friend Alex, she was working as a server at, she was working at Crescent, and she had worked for 8123, the mains management, and I had known her since she was in high school, and it was a volunteer at Modified. And like Charlie knew that if he was hiring her, and he's like, well, Steve's in the same office, he can give her advice and help out, and like it'd be like symbiotic. And it was good for me because I wasn't like, it was just totally symbiotic, because it was like I could go, hey Charlie, can you give me this date on the calendar? And he's like, sure. Like, it was like we were already kind of entwined. And then again, it was like that sort of gradually split to once I sort of opened Rebel, I wasn't coming to the office, and it's because I was at Rebel all the time and was like working from home and working from Rebel, and just they sort of split. And at some point he kept expanding, and he opened Valley Bar, and like their team was expanding, and at some point he was like, dude, like, I love you in here, but like I either need you in here in this desk, or I'm going to take your desk. Like, I need to give this desk to somebody. Like, it doesn't make sense that like there's an empty desk that I need the space for. And I was like, yeah, I'm coming in like once every 2 weeks at that point. And so it was just totally grew out of it. And now I have an office, or pre-COVID had an office with, I was also at that point, like, one of the reasons I wasn't going in, because I had hired Jeff Taylor, who's now my like right-hand guy and talent buyer and marketing guy. And, we were meeting at Rebel to work because we couldn't work I didn't have a space for him. And it just sort of like grew out of it. But I still do tons and tons of business with them. And they book shows in my room and I book shows in their room. And, we compete on things and we work together on things. And uh, it gets confusing, but it works, you know?
How many years were you doing the whole independent promoter thing before you got the crazy idea to open a venue?
Uh, so we opened 5 years ago in 2015. So I'd been promoting shows for 15 years at that point. But the first the first 7 years of that, 5 to 7 years of that, really was mostly DIY local stuff. And it wasn't until like 2008 was when it really became a business. So it's 20 years of doing shows, but
20 years of doing shows, but 12 years of really like going hard.
yeah.
So running a venue is a lot more complex than promoting shows. What were some kind of gotchas when you started building out this room? I mean, the Rebel Lounge is a really old space, if I recall.
Yeah, so it used to be a venue that I actually did shows. Some of the earliest cool shows I did were at this building. It used to be a venue called the Mason Jar, which in Phoenix was like the iconic punk rock bar in the 80s and 90s. And everyone played the Mason Jar. I mean, Guns N' Roses, Nirvana, Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Tool. Chester Bennington's first real show with Linkin Park was at the Mason Jar. All of that, like the Mason Jar was like 300, Rage Against the Machine, like that, all the 80, all the LA 80s bands, Sunset Strips bands, they would come to Phoenix and play the Mason Jar. Was the like 300 cap, 400 cap, rock and roll punk rock bar in the 80s and 90s. And so Phoenix had a history, but it was run down, a shell of a venue. So we had to do a complete remodel. I mean, we gutted it to the bones and added fire sprinklers, reinforced the ceiling, all new plumbing, all new electrical, everything, every surface is, it's the shell of the building and that's it. It was a complete remodel. And that was the one that was like doing that. I had never done anything like it beat it. Like when Charlie was opening Crescent, I had nothing to do with any of that side of things. I was helping him market the shows once it got to the point where we were putting on shows and I was making all the posters and stuff for it. But like I had nothing to do with contractors or permits or any of that. And so when we did Rebel, it was just like a giant crash course in that. Luckily, my partner in it is a real estate guy. He's done a lot of rehab. It wouldn't have happened without him knowing how to do it, but it was still a big learn.
What was the time from I'm buying this place to actually being able to open the doors safely?
Uh, there was a quite a window of there was a lot of back and forth. Are we going to do this? Are we not? With the land, when we bought the plate, when we bought the place, there was a lot of back and forth. We walked away from it a couple of times and we're like, okay, that's not going to work out. And then it came up again. And, so there was 6 months of that sort of back and forth. Are we going to do it? And then from the time where we like pulled the trigger was like December 14 and we opened in May 15. So it's probably like a little under 6 months from we're doing this to opening. And, it got pushed back like twice, all the problems. Luckily it got kind of pushed back before we had really started booking it or anything. And then we ended up having to cancel our friends and family night, like soft open, because we didn't get all our we didn't have our permits to open. And like the next day, like we had a show the next night that was a touring show that had been booked for months as our like opening, and we got the fucking permits like an hour before the band showed up for load in, and we were literally talking like, what do we do? No one knew about the night before. It was a friends and family kind of thing. And then interestingly, Charlie with Valley Bar, they had been doing their project before. They had the same sort of ups and downs. They opened 2 days after us. So and then they had the same issue with their friends and family. They had something come up the last minute and they had to cancel their friends and family, and they opened opening night. And there was I don't remember that they had some sort of similar, like, after the fact, we were both, they had some sort of similar opening first night shit. So it was like that bad dash at the end of like, where are these permits or not permits, where are final certificates and stuff. And we're like ready to go. And we got them like an hour before we opened or had to have load in the first night. So that was stressful.
Yeah, I'm curious, what was your plan B if it never happened?
Oh, that night?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Fucking cry. I don't know. Uh, just be really embarrassed. You know, but one of the problems with opening a music venue compared to other businesses is like you got to book that first night 3 months, 2 months out, 3 months out, and it was like this is going to be, and the grand opening, the show that ended up being our opening was actually a week, like 2 weeks after what we were in. We booked it not intending it to be our first night. We were going to do like 2 weeks before that, and then it was like, okay, well, we might not make that. Like we should be safe, and then it was like, well, this is a show on the calendar. Like that is the date that has to happen. Um, and like we're like that date has to happen because we booked it. Whereas like other restaurants, it's like, do you open this week or next week? It's like we open when you're ready. And like with venues, you can't do that because you gotta, and especially a larger venue where you've got to have that marquee opening. And so, um, yeah.
Yeah. So what ended up being your first show?
A great local band from here, metal band called Gate Creeper, really cool death metal band, and the headliner was a Atlas Moth, cool metal band. So uh, we didn't book that intending it to be our first show. It was another promoter's. It wasn't even our show. It was another promoter's show, and we ended up giving them some great deal on the room to like, we're going to have a bunch of guests at this show and we're going to charge you less because you're going to let in 50 people that like, are coming to our opening night, but you're going to get to be the opening night. And they're like, and I'm going to give you a great deal on the room. And they're like, great. Um, Actually, a stateside show. Charlie, when it ended up being one of Charlie's shows, was our first night because that's just the way calendar works.
Wow, that's excellent negotiation, though.
Yeah, it was like we'll give you the discount on the room, and you give us a ton of we're going to comp a ton of people. And they're like, whatever. It's it works out for everyone.
Now let's fast forward to 5 years into the future, and every promoter that I've been talking to on these podcasts has said that like 2020 was looking like the best year.
There's not a joke. I mean, like it's totally true. I mean, we had our best winter yet. It was it's always that rush where October's great, December and January suck, and then you go into February's okay, and you go into March and you're great again. And it's like there's that season for small clubs that revive on touring stuff. It's that seasonal, in a couple slow months, and we had our best December and best January yet, and we were looking. I was booked the farthest out. We were talking about doing some improvements because we had the one like the saving grace was we had actually for the first time actually built up a little bit in the bank account where it was like, okay, we can finally do some of the things that we've been talking about doing. And like in February, we were talking about, okay, maybe let's upgrade this and do, we were talking about doing some new lights and some, because it was just looking, I had more shows on sale than we'd ever had. We were talking about, hiring people. I had some conversations about giving some raises. Like that's what February was for me. We were talking about raises and hiring people, and we were talking about, what that should look like in the office on the Psycho Steve side. And that, I remember the end of February, like before things started shutting down, like me and Jeff were kind of talking about some raises, and it was like, yeah, right now may not be the best time to do raises. And then COVID hit, and it was like, yeah, I'm glad we didn't do raises. And then it was like 2 weeks later, it was like, oh yeah, you're all like, everyone, like, there's no work to do. Everyone's laid off. Like it was, we went from talking about raises to layoffs in 3 weeks. I remember Polestar. This is the most positive Polestar. Like what everyone was talking about was just, there's always the usual bragging about what your year is going to look like, but this was different. Like everyone was talking about expansion. Everyone was talking about how busy their shows were. I had the 2 weeks before COVID hit, I put on sale the biggest show I've ever booked, the Sad Summer Festival I was doing in Phoenix. That first thing that is the biggest show I'd ever booked like that, like summer festival tour. And it was looking, went on sale and the sales were solid, they were fucking solid. Almost great. For a first year tour or first year coming to Phoenix, and that was what February was.
Tell me how Neva came to be.
Yeah, so that first week when things started shutting down, like with South by Southwest and the shows started shutting down, and you saw a city order to Reverend Moose from Marauder, who runs Independent Venue Week. Uh, I had been a part of an Independent Venue Week last year. I think it was in their third year. They were talking about expanding. I was actually supposed to be on the Independent Venue Week panel at South by Southwest. So at Polestar, we did a call like, what's the panel going to be for South by? Uh, and then so South by canceled, so the panel canceled, and Moose sent out this call to all the people that had signed up for Independent Venue Week. Hey, let's get on a Zoom, like let's get on a call. I don't remember if it was Zoom or maybe it was Zoom. I don't know. Sent out an invite and said on the Thursday, hey, let's all get on a call and like talk about what we're all seeing, because like we're all in the dark. And there was 100 something people on that call, and we did that call, and everyone's like, this is what I'm seeing in Phoenix, and this is what I'm seeing in Minneapolis, and this is what I'm seeing in Seattle. And we're all just freaking out. And then like the next week was like after all the shutdowns, and everyone had shut down, and we were like, after that second call, there was an, oh fuck, what are we doing? Like this is not going to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks. This is going to be a long problem. And a whole bunch of side conversations came out of that. He did some calls with some like more targeted group, a smaller group of the people that had been really active, and we put together Neva. And like that was we announced Neva 6 months ago on Friday. Last Friday was 6 months of Neva, and we were like, if we don't do something together, like no one was talking about us. Everyone was talking about Coachella and the NBA. No one was talking about little promoters and little venues. And we're like, we're fucked. No one is talking about us. And the only way that's going to change is if we all get together. And so we immediately got some, we were talking about this and got some seed funding from 3 ticketing companies, C-Tickets, E-Tickets, and Light. Sort of props to C-Ticket, who did it like sort of sight unseen, sort of like, yeah, if you guys do it, we'll write the first check, and so at the time felt incredibly generous. Enabled us to hire a real amazing lobbyist right out of the gate. So like us having the funds and being able to hire a lobbyist was like, okay, we can do this. And then like the third or fourth IVW call, we announced, hey, we just started this thing called Neva, like everyone should sign up. And within a week, we literally crossed the 50th state during the call the next week and crossed 500 members. And we were just like, man, we were in 48 states the day before. In 6 days, we were in 48 states. And remember like being on the call, like, because I wanted to get like, we wanted to have like an accurate number of how many members. And when it was like, when we started the call, we were in 49 states in DC. And by the time we had to give the announcement, we were at 50 states, and we were like, we're in all 50 states and DC in a week. And that's been now we're up to 3,000 members.
That's it. So 3,000 members, that'd be 3,000 venues?
Businesses. So venues,
Businesses.
promoters, and festivals.
Okay.
So yeah, the 3,000 is the business. So the member is the business. So
That's
not all the individuals.
that's incredible. Uh,
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit about what you're doing now with Neva. Like how are you working to get to keep everybody alive?
You want to talk about me or sort of what Neva's doing first?
What Neva's doing first? Like,
Yeah. So we've been aggressively lobbying for the last 6 months. We've got a precinct captain system where we've got a captain in basically every state. We've got a couple captains in New York and California and some of the bigger states. and just being aggressively lobbying. And our advantage is we're in every major city, so every Congress, like none of us have that many political connections, but we all kind of have our connections with like our congressmen don't know all our venues, but they know the venues in their city. And so we've been able to lobby very aggressively, and they created, through that came we launched the Save Our Stages campaign, which is our campaign that we started to raise the public facing awareness. Uh, and that's led to the Save Our Stages Act, which is a grant program by the Small Business Association for venues that can't operate. It's got bipartisan support. We have, I think, 51 co-sponsors in the Senate now. Over half the Senate has sponsored this thing, which is remarkable. It's totally bipartisan, which is not a word you hear about anything in DC. We've got the law was written by John Cornyn, one of the most prominent Republicans in the Senate, with Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. It passed the last version of the HEROES Act, the last House version. And so we're just hoping that the next time there's stimulus, we're going to be in that, and that's what we're lobbying for. We're also lobbying for extending unemployment benefits. We've been very vocal about, you got to protect the employees. And one of our good gripes is like the PPP program doesn't work for us because we can't operate. Like, how can we spend all the money on employees when like we can't open our doors? There's no revenue. And so we need to be able to cover our expenses. And because of that, the employees need, like, they can't, it's not that they can't work because we can't work. And so we need to really extend unemployment. That has been something we've been very vocal about, and working with a lot of other groups that are trying to extend unemployment. That's one of the big fights in DC is unemployment insurance. We're being very vocal on that. And then the other one we created was NEVA's Emergency Relief Fund, which is a private grant program for venues to get short-term aid. We've got the first round of applications are going now. It's administered by this nonprofit called the Giving Back Fund. And so, they're running the program that we helped create. We created this grant program that's a need-based program. And then we've got to go and do the fundraising. Some of the first fundraisers was Fish did a fundraiser, added a component to a stream. The Foo Fighters put up a T-shirt where the sales went to the fund. Dave Matthews did a stream where the funds went to the ERF. A ton of other bands have done small things that went towards this relief fund. But then the big one is our Save Our Stages Fest that is this weekend, October 16, 17, 18. And that's a big partnership with YouTube, sponsored by Bud Light Seltzer. They come in and they're super supportive. They're sponsoring the whole thing. It's all a giant fundraiser for NEVA's Relief Fund. It's 34 performances by 35 artists. Old school telethon. It's 26 hours of original programming. All of the sets are original sets in venues on real stages, by some of the coolest artists. We've got the Foo Fighters at the Troubadour. We've got the Roots at the Apollo. We've got Ariba McEntire and Brittany Howard are both at the Ryman in Nashville. We've got Demi Lovato and Marshmello performing together. They're releasing a new song together from the Troubadour. We've got Miley Cyrus at the Whiskey A Go-Go. We've got Macklemore at Numos. We've got in Seattle. We've got Little Big Town at Exit Inn and Kelsey Ballerini, both at Exit Inn in Nashville. We've got the Revivalists at Tipitina's in New Orleans. We've got G-Eazy at the Independent in San Francisco. Forgetting a bunch. Gus Dapperton at LPR in New York. And a bunch more. Sebastian Yatra in Fort Lauderdale at the Broward Center. And so it's a really diverse group of artists. I think it's one of the best most diverse festivals you've ever seen. Complete, diverse group of venues. And that's a huge partnership with YouTube. They're incredibly the YouTube music team has been working incredibly hard on making this happen. And yeah, and that's this weekend, and that's the first big public. In 6 months, we've never gone to the public and said donate. We've never pushed our merch store. We've never pushed a donate button. Um, Early on, that was because we wanted, every venue was doing GoFundMe's and things, and we didn't want to take from that energy. It was like, we're not trying to take, like, everyone's doing their own thing and we need to support everyone doing that. And then now it's like, no, we need to raise some funds. And so this is our first big public fundraiser. And it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, that is one hell of a lineup. Yeah, like if so you as vice president, what's your part in all of this giant beast of a thing?
So the giant beast. So I'm the committee chair for our membership committee, um, which we're kind of just building out. Like for a while, it's been a pretty small team handling it, but we're kind of expanding that team. And one of the things with Neva is we're really doing a lot of work to really build the ground roots to make this a permanent uh, organization that outlasts this pandemic. And how do we do a lot of things slow and right now? I mean, everything's been so now rush, but like, how do we do a lot of ground, how do we build the foundations for this to be an organization that lasts and has a place in the business after, in the industry for a long time. And so we're doing a lot of work. The membership team is working on that, building that out. So that's sort of my prime role. And then I've also I help out on the marketing committee, advise the marketing committee, although it's that team is all such pros that know what they're doing. Lenore from Paps Theater and Jamie Loeb and Ashley from First Avenue and so many names on the people on that team working really hard. And then also I'm sort of took the role of sort of associate producer on SOS Fest for Diva. So been helping, being very in the weeds of in the minutia of Save Our Stages Fest and working. I kind of worked on all the venues and a lot of the creative and you know that's a big team. It's a big team working on SOS from both all across, and so kind of me and the other Steve on the board, Steve Sternshine, who's our treasurer and finance committee chair. The YouTube deal and the SOS Fest is really been his baby, and I've kind of been his support on the fest. Yeah, so those are the two big projects, and then just so much little. There's so much. Then I'm also on the lobbying committee and help our precinct captain in Arizona. So I'm on all the lobbying calls or most of the lobbying calls. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about the future of Neva. Uh, I mean, there's an independent record store coalition, there's an independent bookstore coalition. It makes sense that there's a national independent venue association where you all kind of work with each other and have each other's backs. Uh, what do you see Neva doing in 5 years?
One is I don't know what the problems in 5 years will be. Like I don't like the point is we were so screwed in March because there was no one speaking for us and no one saw that problem coming and no one was there to speak for us. And so that's why we had to build Neva so fast was because there wasn't someone. And so I don't know what the next problem is going to be, but like Neva should be there when it is. And like I was talking to another promoter, an older promoter who was telling me about, when they all got together like 30 years ago because the IRS was saying that hospitality didn't count as a business expense. It was, entertainment. And it was like, no, like hospitality at concerts is a business expense. Like you can't, and all the promoters got together and lobbied the IRS and got the IRS to like acknowledge it as and I had never heard that story. I don't know any, promoter tax policy from the early 90s. I don't know anything, that was long before me, but like, that's the kind, like, who knows what the next issue is, or, I don't know what the next issue for like the big picture of why it's needed. But the other one is I think there can be a lot of network, like the amount of value that is being unlocked from all of us working together, I think is going to be huge. Having a much more positive voice. We have a DEI or a diversity and inclusion task force. DEI, d- uh, fucking mental fart here. Diversity, equality, and inclusion task force that is thinking about issues in the industry around that. They did their first panel with a NEVA panel today. That I wish I'm on too many committees to be on that one. I wish I had some, but like there's a great group of people on that committee that are working to think about how NEVA can be involved in promoting those issues within the industry. I'm excited to see what they come up with and how NEVA can support those initiatives. It's early for me to talk to what they're working. We want to be able to support those initiatives. We've talked a lot about in future being able to do education both within the industry and in the artist world, like supporting music education programs and also supporting industry, support mobility in the industry, education within the industry. Like so many of us, like there was no education on how to do this. I was a teenager fucking learning on the back of a flyer, like I didn't go to college for this. Like I learned doing shows by doing them badly, and eventually I learned how to do them okay. And then now I think I can do them pretty well, but like so many of us, it's like, yeah, I was in a band and I learned how to do this, and so like, can we provide some education services and things like that? Like, I want to do, all the things that our members can't do themselves. Like, there's a lot of things we can do that that none of our members can do on their own. And so like, that's, what are the things the bigger players can do because they're big that we can't do? And, promoting diversity, promoting education, raising funds for charitable works. Like, that's what we need to do, is stuff like that.
Yeah, that's amazing and ambitious, and
Yeah.
I'm I'm kind of this is the type of stuff that's happening right now where I think when we come out of this, we're gonna come out of this stronger than
I
before.
hope so. That's the one that's so stressful right now, is that it feels so binary. It's like either none of us are going to survive this and we're all going to be decimated financially, because no one can survive. I mean, no one can survive this on their own. Like none of us are going to survive till next year to do shows without aid. Like a handful, some of the real, there's a few venue owners that are really rich. Most of us aren't, and even the well-off ones are not that rich to survive this. There's a few some of the city venues and whatnot, but other than that, we're either going to be decimated or we're going to get Save Our Stages Act passed and get real aid and be able to survive this and come out of this on the other end stronger. And it won't be status quo. And we've seen, Phoenix is different because a lot of us already work together a lot. Like, we're talking about me and Charlie, but there's already a very symbiotic relationship even between the Live Nation office in Phoenix and the Lucky Man and the Rialto. Like, we all book shows in each other's rooms. We all go, Phoenix already kind of had a little of that compared to a lot of markets, but like, I'm talking to so many people who they're working together for the first time and they're in the same city and they're like, that's always been my competitor, but we're on lobbying calls together and we're fighting for this together. And so that camaraderie, like, I don't know what comes out of it, but hopefully something positive. Once you've spent, 6 months in the trenches, like fighting the same fight, uh, you know, there's I got a lot of new friends right now. So
That's awesome.
Mhm.
All right. So I begin and end every one of these with the same question. Um, and since you haven't, heard any of these yet, this is a surprise to you as well. So that 17-year-old, I will call him Baby Psycho. If you could have a chat with 17-year-old Baby Psycho right now, What would you tell them about what you became?
What would I tell him about what I became? Uh, that's a different way to word that. It wasn't where I thought you were going. Uh, yeah. Um, One, like that time I was like so DIY and punk rock and indie rock. It was also, my musical tastes and stuff is like way expanded than it ever was back then. And even then it was kind of diverse, but it definitely had this underground tint. And I was talking the other day about how so many of those discussions just don't really make sense. All the 90s, who's punk rock, what's the score kind of mentality just doesn't really make sense anymore. And I don't, it's very, I see things very differently than on that spectrum. I was thinking how, if you would have told me in the 90s that you listened to everything, in my mind that would mean like, oh, that means you have no musical taste, like you don't know what you're talking about, you listen to mainstream stuff and you don't know music. And now if you didn't tell me that, if you don't say I listen to everything, I think you have no taste. I think people's musical tastes are way more eclectic now than they used to be. I think the internet and Spotify and iTunes and everything has done that, and YouTube. um, so being more open-minded than I was back then. um, are you looking for it to be more like advice to that person, or more about who I am now? So
Uh,
weirdly worded question. Uniquely,
maybe that's why people don't. Maybe that's why people don't like it.
yeah,
That it's a weirdly.
yeah,
Essentially, like, would they be excited about where how you what you ended up doing? Like,
yeah. I think I never would have thought that this would be what I was doing. That I would be able to somewhat sort of make a career out of it. Never, you know, never would have seen myself in that role at the time. Like I was a little punk rock kid that was doing. I never early on never cared about booking big bands. Never cared about getting the job at the radio station. It was like I want to book the punk rock shows I want to book, and I don't want to talk. I don't want to fight with agents. I don't want to like beg for like it was like I want to book the shows I want to book. I want to work with who I want to work with, and that's it. And I have zero interest in, never had interest in conferences early on. Never had interest in like I didn't, never cared about festivals when they started popping up because it was like, well, I'm doing my own little thing. Like I don't need, now very different, you know, very different perspective now than I had then on that sort of stuff, and realize that you can kind of do both.
thank you
Yeah.
so much for taking this time out of your insanely busy day. And
Hi, I'm Michelle Varay. And I'm Kimberly Trung, and we are the host of Crush Fictionally, a podcast all about your favorite fictional characters from movies, TV shows, and more.
Each episode, we pick a theme, curate a list of characters that we love, why we love them, and some fun facts about the people who created them.
So if you've ever felt a true connection with a fictional character,
Tune in to Crush Fictionally on Campfire Media.
or wherever you find your podcast.
listening, don't forget to vote once again. Please, please, please don't forget to vote. And also, go to saveourstages.com or nevasos.org to give some money to Neva. They also have that amazing SOS Fest archived on their YouTube channel, and there'll be links to that in the event page. And thanks again for joining me. You'll hear from me sometime in the future, hopefully sooner than later. Bye.